The Soviet Sleep Experiment. The Monsters in Room 13. In the late 1940s, behind the impenetrable Iron Curtain of the Soviet Union, a team of military researchers embarked on a highly classified, deeply unethical scientific experiment. The goal was simple, yet monstrous: to eliminate the human need for sleep entirely, creating the ultimate, tireless soldier for the upcoming Cold War. The military believed that if a human being could function at 100% capacity without ever closing their eyes, the Soviet army would become unstoppable. To test this theory, researchers selected 5 political prisoners, enemies of the state who were promised their complete freedom if they could survive a seemingly simple challenge. They had to remain awake for 30 consecutive days inside a sealed, heavily monitored chamber. But what the prisoners did not know was that the air they were breathing was continuously pumped with an experimental, oxygen-based gas stimulant designed to artificially keep the human brain from entering a state of rest. The chamber was a masterpiece of isolation and high-tech containment for its era. It was stocked with enough dried food to last for months, running water, a toilet, cot beds without blankets, and a small library of books. The researchers monitored the subjects through small, thick glass portholes built into the steel walls, and their only form of communication was through a series of internal microphones. For the first 5 days, the experiment progressed smoothly, almost boringly. The 5 prisoners, desperate for their freedom, cooperated completely. They spent their hours talking to each other, reading books, and sharing stories of their lives before the war. The microphones picked up their conversations, which were calm, rational, and hopeful. However, the researchers noted that as the clock ticked past the 120-hour mark, the atmosphere inside the room began to shift into something dark, heavy, and deeply unsettling. By the 6th day, the casual conversations stopped entirely. The subjects began to exhibit severe signs of clinical paranoia. They stopped speaking to one another, choosing instead to isolate themselves in separate corners of the cold chamber. They began taking turns whispering into the microphones, desperately trying to betray their fellow prisoners to the researchers outside in hopes of winning favor. The psychological breakdown had officially begun. The gas stimulant was forcing their brains to remain awake, but the lack of natural rest was rapidly dissolving their sanity. Then, on the 9th day, the silence was shattered by a sound that chilled the researchers to their very bones. One of the prisoners suddenly lost all emotional control. He began running frantically back and forth across the length of the chamber, screaming at the top of his lungs for 3 consecutive hours without stopping. He screamed until his vocal cords literally tore apart, reducing his voice to a wet, sickening squeak. What happened next was even more disturbing than the screaming. While the first subject continued to choke on his own blood in the corner, a second prisoner began to scream as well. The remaining 3 subjects, instead of trying to help or calm them down, calmly walked over to the bookshelves. They began tearing the pages out of the heavy books, one by one, smearing them with their own feces, and systematically pasting the wet paper over the glass viewing portholes. Within minutes, the interior of the room was completely hidden from the researchers' eyes. The microphones fell dead silent. For the next 3 days, absolutely no sound emerged from inside the chamber. The researchers checked the audio equipment repeatedly, fearing that the prisoners had died or escaped, but the internal sensors indicated that oxygen consumption inside the room was at an incredibly high level. The 5 men were not dead. They were breathing heavily, consuming oxygen at a rate that suggested they were performing intense, vigorous physical activity in absolute silence. By the 14th day, the absolute silence became too much for the military command to bear. Against the original protocol, the researchers decided to speak to the prisoners directly through the intercom system, hoping to provoke a response. The lead scientist stepped up to the microphone, his voice trembling as he announced over the speaker, "We are opening the chamber to test the microphones. Step away from the door and lie flat on the floor, or you will be shot. Compliance will earn one of you your immediate freedom." There was a long, agonizing pause through the static of the speaker. Then, a single, calm, and hauntingly cold voice replied from the darkness of the room, "We no longer want to be freed." The statement sent a shockwave of terror through the research facility. Debate raged for hours among the military officers, but finally, at midnight on the 15th day, the decision was made. The researchers decided to turn off the experimental gas stimulant and flush the chamber with fresh, clean air. The moment the gas left the room, the microphones exploded with a chorus of frantic, desperate screams. The voices inside were no longer human. They were begging, crying, and screaming for the gas to be turned back on. They screamed as if their lives depended on it, howling that the clean air was killing them. The heavy steel door was unlocked, and a squad of heavily armed Soviet soldiers stepped inside the room. Nothing could have prepared them for the absolute butchery that awaited them in the shadows. The floor of the chamber was flooded with 4 inches of dark, stagnant water, mixed with blood, feces, and chunks of human flesh. The dried food rations had barely been touched. Instead, the 5 subjects had turned to a different source of sustenance, themselves. One of the prisoners was dead, his body torn open, his organs piled on the floor over the floor drain. The surviving 4 subjects were no longer recognizable as human beings. They had ripped their own skin, muscles, and flesh from their abdomens using their bare hands. Their ribs were exposed, and their lungs could be seen expanding and contracting through their open chests. They were actively eating their own flesh, yet they possessed a supernatural, terrifying physical strength. When the soldiers attempted to extract them, the prisoners fought back with demonic ferocity. They tore into the soldiers with their teeth and fingernails, killing 2 guards instantly and severely injuring several others. They laughed maniacally as their own bones were broken in the struggle, screaming continuously for the researchers to turn the gas back on. Eventually, the surviving subjects were restrained and moved to a secure medical facility. Surgeons attempted to operate on them to repair their torn abdomens, but the lack of anesthesia proved to be a fatal complication. When injected with heavy sedatives that would put a normal elephant to sleep, the subjects' hearts simply beat faster, their eyes widening with an unnatural adrenaline. During one operation, a subject stared directly into the eyes of the surgeon, smiling a bloody, toothless smile, and whispered repeatedly, "Keep cutting. Keep cutting." They did not want the pain to stop, because pain was the only thing keeping them awake. The moment any of the subjects accidentally closed their eyes and fell asleep, their brain waves flattened on the monitor instantly. They died the exact second they drifted off, their bodies incapable of surviving a natural state of rest. In the end, only one subject remained alive, his heart beating with a frantic, dying rhythm. The lead researcher, driven to the brink of insanity by the horrors he had witnessed, pulled a pistol from his holster. He pointed the gun directly at the final prisoner and asked a desperate, shaking question, "What are you?" "I must know. What are you?" The creature smiled, its human eyes locked onto the scientist, and whispered its final, chilling revelation, "Have you forgotten so easily? We are you. We are the madness that lurks within you all, begging to be free at every moment in your deepest animal minds. We are what you hide from in your beds at night. We are what you sedate into silence when you go to the nocturnal sleep that we cannot tread." The scientist pulled the trigger, burying a bullet in the creature's brain. The monitor went flat, and the secret of the Soviet sleep experiment was buried forever in the dark archives of history.